Part 1. He took the credit, but I took everything else. I knew something was off the moment he smiled. Thought was that smug, polished grin, the kind that says, "Look what I did," even when he didn't do a damn thing. My name is Alex. I'm 29 years old, and I work in software development. Specifically, I was a back-end developer for a mid-sized tech firm in Chicago. I say was because everything changed the day my boss, Rick, decided to throw me under the bus and then park on top of me. Rick was the kind of manager who thrived on perception. Tall, loud, all suits and fake handshakes. He could talk his way through any meeting without saying much of anything. And while he was good at impressing upper management, he was absolutely clueless when it came to the actual tech we worked on, which was fine. That was my job. I like staying behind the scenes. I wasn't interested in presentations or politics. I just wanted to build something useful, real. So when our company announced they were pivoting to a new SaaS model and needed someone to architect the back end from scratch, I jumped at it. And Rick, he let me lead it, build it, breathe it, until he saw how successful it was. That's when things got ugly. How it started. The pitch about 6 months ago, I presented my initial prototype to the dev team. Clean structure, scalable framework, API first design, all built from the ground up in my own time, on top of work hours. Rick was impressed. Or rather, he acted like he was. "Nice work, Alex," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "We'll polish this up and make a killer pitch to the executive board next month." I didn't think much of that sentence at the time, but I should have, because what Rick really meant was, "We'll polish up your work, and I'll present it like it was mine." The presentation that changed everything. 3 weeks later, the big quarterly review came. Now, normally I'd be in the room for something like this, especially since it was my code. But this time, Rick told me, "Don't worry about it. I'll handle the execs. You just focus on finishing that second module." Again, I should have known, but I was naive. I thought, maybe he wants to shield me from the politics. Maybe he'll give me credit where it's due. Yeah, no. That afternoon, I watched the meeting replay when it was posted to the internal hub. What I saw made my stomach twist. Rick stood at the front of the room, clicking through my architecture diagrams, using my phrasing, explaining my work as if he'd spent months building it himself. Not once did he say my name. Not once did he mention the dev team. It was all what I decided. My vision was I implemented. I sat there at my desk, fist clenched, as the VP of product complimented him. "Rick, this is exactly the kind of innovation we need. Brilliant work." And Rick, he smiled that same smug grin, like he just pulled off the perfect heist. I tried to stay professional the next morning. I knocked on his office door. He didn't even look surprised. "Hey, Alex, what's up?" I sat down, keeping my tone even. "I watched the recording of your pitch." Rick nodded. "Great, right? They loved it. I noticed you didn't mention I built it." That wiped the smile off his face for about half a second. Then he leaned back and gave me this patronizing look. The kind people give when they're about to gaslight you. "Well, Alex, technically you implemented it, but the overall strategy, that was a team effort. And as your manager, I have to represent the team at the executive level." I blinked. "But it wasn't a team effort. I built that from scratch. You weren't even involved until I showed you the prototype." He shrugged. "We're all working toward the same goal here. Don't get hung up on credit. It's childish." Childish? That word echoed in my head the whole walk back to my desk. Then things got worse after that. Rick started treating me like I was a threat. He nitpicked my code in meetings, questioned my time logs, forgot to CC me on important emails. When I submitted a follow-up feature, an automated deployment tool I coded myself, he emailed the entire department about his idea for continuous integration, linking to my repo without naming. It was clear now. Rick wasn't just stealing my work. He was actively trying to erase my role, and the more praise he got, the more dangerous he became. Because when someone's identity is built on stolen brilliance, any challenge becomes a threat. I started documenting everything, every commit, every Slack message, every email where he gave me vague suggestions, and then later claimed those ideas as his own because I knew I couldn't beat him at his own game, schmoozing executives and spinning stories. But I could build something else, a plan, part. Two, when they don't let you speak, make them listen. It took me about a month to realize the system wasn't going to save me. HR. They were worse than useless. I approached them twice. The first time, I calmly explained what was happening, how Rick was misrepresenting work, excluding me from meetings, subtly sabotaging my role. The HR rep nodded like they were listening. You're saying you feel ... undervalued? No, I said. I'm saying he's taking credit for my work and actively trying to silence me. They told me they'd investigate. They DIDN single quotes to you. 2 weeks later, I got an email from Rick with a mandatory performance improvement plan. The kind of thing they hand out before they fire you. So I made a choice. If I stayed silent, I'd be pushed out. If I yelled, I'd look unstable. But if I played smart, if I stopped reacting and started preparing, I might be able to burn his entire facade to the ground. So I did what I do best. I built. I started with his lies. Remember that presentation Rick gave to the executive board? The one where he said he designed everything? I dug into the metadata of the original slide deck. My name was all over the file history, created by me. Timestamps matching the night I stayed up until 2 a.m. working on it. I saved those files. Then I pulled my commit history from our internal Git platform. Every single push, every line of code linked to my account. Documented, timestamped, verifiable. I exported copies, printed them, saved backups. I went further, screenshots of Slack threads. Emails where Rick gave vague approvals after the fact. Even a Zoom recording where I presented the system architecture to him, explaining how it worked while he nodded. Silently. And then came the jackpot. The day he slipped, it was a Friday stand-up. Rick was rushing through updates when one of the senior devs, Clara, asked about a complex bug fix in the deployment tool. Rick, can you explain how the rollback mechanism works again? I'm confused about the threshold parameters. He froze, completely blanked. Then he stammered, I think that's more of a back-end detail. Alex, you want to take that? I did. I broke it down smoothly, step by step, while Rick tried to look unfazed, but Clara caught it. So did the others. They weren't stupid. It was the first crack in his perfect image, and I saw it. So I widened it. The Whisper network guy didn't. Come out swinging. Instead. I started seeding quiet truths during coffee breaks. Over Slack. After long meetings when people were already frustrated. It's weird how Rick takes credit for everything, huh? Did you know I actually wrote that whole module last quarter? Funny how Rick never seems to touch the code, but knows just enough to present it. At first, people were cautious, but over time, the responses shifted. Yeah, that's been bothering me too. Honestly, I've seen it. You do most of the real work. He gave me a vague idea for a feature I built solo, and then bragged about his leadership in front of the VP. Turns out, I wasn't the only one. Rick had a pattern, and I wasn't his first victim. Just the one who refused to shut up. So I decided to go further. I called a meeting, operation, exposure. I invited 5 of the dev team members to a project review over lunch. I brought pizza. They brought curiosity. When we sat down, I laid out everything. The timeline. The commit logs. The emails. The screenshots. The patterns. I didn't rant. I didn't beg for sympathy. I just showed them what Rick didn't want anyone to see. By the end of the hour, Clara sat back and said, "You've got a full case." Honestly, if we presented this to upper management, no, I said. You present it. I'll stay out of it. Why? One asked. Because Rick's entire narrative depends on painting me as bitter or ungrateful. If I step up, he spins it. But if all of you calmly, collectively bring this forward, they have to listen. They nodded. Clara smiled. The day it all broke open 2 weeks later. The head of engineering called a special meeting. Rick walked in looking completely calm, coffee in hand, tie perfect, until he saw who was sitting at the front of the room. The CTO. The head of HR. 3 senior DEVS. Clara. Me. Rick blinked, smiled weakly. Did I miss a memo? Clara stood. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She just said, we need to clarify where credit is going on this project. There's been a serious pattern of misrepresentation, and we've gathered proof. Then she handed over the folder. Rick turned pale, and I leaned back in my chair, finally silent, as the weight of truth did what my voice never could. Part 3. When the house of cards falls. Let it crash loudly. The meeting ended without a word from Rick. Not because he wasn't allowed to speak, but because he couldn't. His mouth opened a few times, like he was going to say something, some excuse, some clever deflection, some Rick-style misunderstanding speech. But nothing came out. Because every time he glanced at the documents Clara handed over, the printouts of commit histories, slide metadata, and direct Slack exchanges, he knew. He had no out. The investigation that followed the company launched a formal internal review. It was quiet, clinical, and deeply uncomfortable. For 2 weeks, Rick was on leave. The dev team kept working, and without his interruptions. Everything actually ran better. The CTO, to her credit, took the situation seriously. She met with all of us individually. We each gave our versions. We each handed over our screenshots, our emails, our notes, and the pattern was undeniable. Rick hadn't just stolen my work. He'd done it to Clara. To James from DevOps. To one of the interns who quit early, claiming this place doesn't value real contribution. And that intern had been right. Until now. What happened to Rick officially? Rick resigned unofficially. He was offered the chance to walk away quietly rather than face termination for professional misconduct. But here's the kicker. He didn't go quietly. He tried to spin the situation, told anyone who would listen that we'd ganged up on him, that this was a mutiny led by bitter underlings, and that he was just too effective a manager. I don't know who believed him, but I do know this. 1 week after his departure, he updated his LinkedIn. New title, consultant, available for strategic leadership engagements. No mention of where he worked last. That's when I knew he was done. Not because of what I did, but because finally no one else was covering for him. But that wasn't the end after Rick left. There was a vacuum. The CTO offered to restructure the department. Clara got promoted to team lead. And me? I got a raise. A big one. They wanted me to take over Rick's old responsibilities. But I said no, not because I wasn't capable, but because I was done managing other people's egos. I wanted to build without politics, without games. They respected that. I stayed as a lead engineer with a clearer path, better support, and finally credit where credit was due. But there was still one last thing I needed to do. The industry knows in tech. Your reputation follows you. Quietly, silently, but it follows. I never went public about what Rick did. I didn't need to, but I did receive a LinkedIn message a few months later. Hi, Alex. I'm a recruiter working with a mid-sized startup. Rick applied for a senior leadership role here, and he listed you as someone he supervised closely. Would you be open to a reference check? I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied, I'd be happy to speak off the record. Let me know when works for you. We had a phone call. I didn't rant. I didn't exaggerate. I stuck to facts. I shared my documentation. I mentioned the internal review, the CTO's findings, the pattern. The recruiter was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, that explains a lot. Rick didn't get the job, and I slept better that night than I had in a year. Reflection. Why I fought back. You might wonder why I went to such lengths. Why not just quit? Why not just leave him to fail on his own? Because people like Rick don't fail unless someone makes them. They keep rising, keep lying, keep crushing anyone beneath them to keep their fake success alive. And I wasn't going to be another one of his victims. I don't regret the fight. I regret waiting so long to start it, but I'm proud. I finished it. Part 4. the fallout you don't expect, and the respect you finally earn with Rick gone. You'd think everything would return to normal, but in a strange way, it DN single quotes T dot things got better, but not in the everything's fine again kind of way. More like the fog finally cleared, and we saw just how far off course we drifted while Rick was at the wheel. The office culture shift, Clara, now officially team lead, started reshaping how we worked. She killed the endless status meetings. She replaced them with actual one-on-ones where we could talk about blockers, code, ideas, not just performance metrics. And the results? Productivity shot up. Morale improved. People actually stayed late, not out of fear, but because they wanted to finish what they were building. We even brought back the Friday demo sessions we used to have before. Rick cut them for being a waste of time. Turns out they were the best time of the week. That's when we learned from each other, celebrated small wins, and started laughing in the office again, rebuilding myself. But it wasn't just the office that needed rebuilding, it was me down after. Months of being gaslit, sidelined, and disrespected. I carried a lot more than just frustration. I carried self-doubt. Was I really that easy to ignore? Why didn't I stand up sooner? Why did it take near destruction for me to find my voice? I brought that to therapy. Yeah, I started therapy during all this. Best decision I made, my therapist said something that stuck with me. Survivors often feel guilty for not fighting back earlier. But when the fire's burning, you're just trying to breathe. You fought back when you could, and you won. That word won felt strange, because even after Rick left, it didn't feel like victory, it felt like exhaustion. But slowly it started to change. The recognition I didn't expect a few months later. We had a company-wide summit. The CTO gave a speech at the closing session. In it, she talked about quiet integrity, people who will hold the line when it would be easier to give in. Then she said this: some of the biggest breakthroughs this year came not just from innovation, but from courage. From people who refused to let toxic leadership derail their team, people who chose truth over fear. She looked directly at me, then said, to those people, you know who you are. Thank you for reminding us what leadership actually looks like. I didn't cry, but I definitely clenched my jaw and looked down because my throat burned. That one moment, that simple public acknowledgement meant more than any raise ever could, because for once, I wasn't an invisible an unexpected message one night, maybe 6 months after everything blew up, I got an email. Subject line: I'm sorry, for real this time. It was from Rick. I stared at it for 5 full minutes before opening it. Here's what it said. Alex, I've been doing a lot of thinking. Since everything went down, you didn't deserve what I did to you. You were talented, loyal, and generous with your ideas. I took advantage of that. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't, but I wanted you to know I'm not proud of who I was. I hope someday I can become someone worth respecting. Rick, there was no manipulation, no plea, no excuses, just shame. And maybe growth. I didn't reply. I wasn't ready to. A new beginning eventually. I did leave the company on my terms. I got an offer from a rising startup, a chance to lead a project from the ground up, total creative freedom, real trust. When I told Clara, she hugged me and said, go, build something great. So I did, but I took the lessons with me. Document everything. Speak up, even if your voice shakes. Build allies, not enemies, and never, ever let someone else take credit for your fire. Part 5. You don't get justice. You make it. The day one left the company, I didn't clean out my desk with a dramatic speech. I didn't flip off the security camera or smirk on my way out. I just walked out quietly, a folder in one hand and a coffee in the other, with a half smile that wasn't about revenge. It was about peace. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking away defeated. I was walking away free. The startup chapter, the new job wasn't flashy. The office was small. The chairs weren't ergonomic. We had bad coffee and no parking. But the team, they were real. Smart, collaborative, transparent. Nobody trying to climb over someone else. No one hoarding credit. The CTO there asked me during the interview, what are you most proud of in your last role? And I told her I helped dismantle a toxic structure and rebuild it into something better. Even if no one sees that on a resume, it's the work I'm proudest of. She nodded. That's leadership. And hired me the next day, got rebuilding trust. Here's something they don't tell you when you survive betrayal. Even after it's over, even after the villain is gone, the echo of their voice lingers. You question praise. You second guess compliments. You flinch when someone says, great work. Waiting for the next sentence to undermine it, it took time to unlearn that at my new job. My manager actually thanked me for documentation I wrote, said. It saved him hours. And I waited for the sarcasm, for the twist, but there was none. Just honest thanks. Those small moments. They healed something bigger than they looked. Rick, again about a year after I started the new job. I heard from an old coworker. Apparently, Rick had tried to land another tech leadership position, mid-sized company, decent funding, early stage team, and someone from that company had reached out to my company's CTO. A back channel reference. My CTO asked me if I wanted to say anything. I paused. Then said, "Tell them the truth. Nothing more, nothing less." She did. Rick didn't get the job. I don't take joy in that. Not really. But I do feel relief. Because people like that don't just learn accountability. They need reminders that the world remembers. The letter I finally wrote months later. I was cleaning out an old email archive and stumbled on Rick's apology again. This time I didn't delete it. I opened it. Reread it. And finally replied. Rick, thank you for your message. I hope you meant what you wrote. I won't forget what happened. But I'm not holding on to hate. I'm focusing on what's ahead, building something better wherever I go. I hope you are, too. Alexei didn't send it to make peace with him. I sent it to make peace with myself. What I learned, here's the truth I carry now. People will try to silence you, dismiss you, take what's yours and pretend it was always theirs. And if you're quiet, they might win for a while. But if you gather your strength, your evidence, your allies, if you wait for the right moment and then strike with truth, precision, and calm resolve, you don't just get justice. You become it. Final thoughts, my story isn't a fairy tale. It didn't end with applause or headlines, but it did end with truth prevailing. With a team stronger than before. And with a man who once whispered self-doubt into my ear, now nowhere near my path. That's a win, not the loudest one, but the kind that actually lasts when you burn the bridge and build the road ahead. It's been 2 years. 2 years since Rick tried to take everything I'd built. 2 years since I nearly walked away from the career I once loved. 2 years since I realized that sometimes justice isn't given. It's engineered. No. I'm doing better than I ever expected. But the truth is, I'm not the same person anymore. I became the person I needed back then. There's one thing that stuck with me from the whole experience. It's this. No one ever stepped in to protect me when it mattered most. Not HR. Not our management. Not even some coworkers who probably knew what was happening. It wasn't malice. It was passivity. The silent assumption that someone else would fix it. That I was probably okay. So now, in every team I'm on, I'm that person. The one who says something when credit gets misdirected. The one who makes sure the intern in the corner gets to present their own idea. The one who documents. Who asks the awkward question in meetings. Who says, wait, that was Alex's code. Let's make sure that's clear. Not because I want recognition, but because I remember what it felt like to be erased. Rick became a warning, not a ghost. Sometimes, late at night, I still replay those moments. The look on Rick's face when I laid out the proof. The smugness deflating. The silence in the room. And I asked myself, was it worth it? Yes. 1,000 times. Yes, because he needed to be stopped. Because every new job he tried to land without accountability was a risk to someone else. I didn't destroy his life. He did that himself. I just held up the mirror. How my career changed. Funny. Dang, once I left that toxic environment, I started to thrive. At my new job. I proposed a code audit process that caught a major bug before it launched. My manager wrote to the whole team. Shout out to Alex for catching us. Saved us a week of rollback and that simple email. It healed more than any therapy session ever could because it proved one thing. In the right environment, good work speaks for itself. It doesn't need a mouthpiece. It doesn't need a middleman. It just needs space and truth. I wrote about it and people listened. 6 months ago, I wrote a long post on Medium. Not about Rick specifically. I didn't name names, but I wrote about credit theft. About being silenced in tech. About what happens when you fight back and what it costs. I called it the quietest sabotage. What happens when your work is stolen? It blew up. Messages poured in from designers, engineers, people who said, "This happened to me too." One person wrote, "I thought I was crazy." Until I read this, thank you. That broke me a little because I was that person once. So sharing my story. Let's even one person speak up earlier, louder, clearer. It was worth it. The future. Now, I've been offered promotions, speaking gigs, even a small book deal. Still thinking about that one. But more importantly, I'm respected now. Not because I'm loud. Not because I crushed anyone, but because I stood up when it mattered. Because I didn't let someone rewrite my story. And now, I own every chapter. Final words to anyone reading this who's been silenced. You're not crazy, you're not alone, and you're not powerless. Collect your evidence. Build your allies. Sharpen your voice, because when the time comes, you won't. Just survive. You'll shift the ground beneath them and walk forward on your own terms.